Today, the U.S. Treasury Department announces new crypto-focused sanctions on Hamas. Prosecutors in the SBF trial use phone records to try to connect SBF to meetings with U.S. politicians. And after an unsubstantiated rumor briefly sent prices soaring, we talked to Quinn Thompson of Maple about the latest for Bitcoin investors. Welcome to CNBC's Crypto World. I'm Tanea McKeel. Crypto prices little change this morning, with Bitcoin down about 0.8% by noon Eastern. Ether, meanwhile, lower by 1/3%, while Chainlink was pretty much flat, only falling about 0.25%. Let's talk about the top stories. A bipartisan group of lawmakers is calling on the Biden administration to crack down on Hamas's use of crypto. A new letter, which was drafted on Tuesday and signed by more than 100 lawmakers from both chambers of the Capitol, said Hamas has been clear about the intended use of the crypto it solicited and asked the administration to give more detail on the plan to prevent the use of crypto to finance terrorism. Specifically, it asked the Biden administration to confirm reports that groups like Hamas had raised $130 million in crypto between August 2021 and June 2023, and to provide information on which exchanges or actors are allowing the transactions. And just today, the Treasury Department announced new sanctions targeting Hamas operatives and financial facilitators. It pointed to virtual currencies as one way Hamas and its operatives are raising funds. Of course, the letter and these latest sanctions come as President Biden is visiting Israel after the terrorist attack by Hamas that killed some 1,300 Israelis and the subsequent Israeli bombings on Gaza that have killed more than 3,000 Palestinians. Next, the EU has approved new tax reporting rules. The European Council adopted a new directive to boost cooperation between national tax authorities. Companies will now have to report more information on transactions of crypto assets, and tax authorities for EU member states will also have to automatically share more info. The new rules hope to crack down on tax evasion and fraud, especially among high net worth individuals. They were approved by the European Parliament earlier this year. Now they'll be entered into the official journal, or record for legal acts. It will technically take effect 12 days after that, but a 2-year delay means reporting requirements won't begin until 2026. Finally, in the trial of SBF, we're learning more about how well connected he was in the run-up to FTX's collapse. An FBI agent has walked the court through thousands of phone records to help connect Bankman-Fried to scheduled meetings in the U.S. with President Clinton, New York Governor Kathy Hochul, New York City Mayor Eric Adams, and more. Mayor Adams has publicly portrayed an especially pro-crypto stance, like offering to take his first paycheck in crypto. The argument from SBF's defense is that the records don't show who exactly was using the phone on the specific dates and times, just that the phone was in the area. The FBI agent agreed. Now, prosecutors are wrapping up their arguments ahead of a break in the trial. After Thursday, court will be in recess until the middle of next week, when Bankman-Fried's defense will pick up by making its case to the court. All right, let's turn back to crypto markets for our main story. Crypto World's Jordan Smith spoke with Quinn Thompson, the head of growth and capital markets at Maple, to discuss the recent rise in Bitcoin's price and why investors are optimistic about the approval of a spot Bitcoin ETF.
Bitcoin prices are moving lower over the past few days, but we did get a boost at the start of this week off that unsubstantiated rumor about a Bitcoin ETF getting approved. And let me make it clear that that is not the case. So far, that is not bared out. But the fact that we saw such a rise in prices, they're still lingering around that 30K level. We're still around 28. What do you make of the lingering effects of that rumor, and just how much of that is a preview of what we could see if one of these ETFs does get approved?
Yeah, Jordan, I think it's a little bit of the complacency that's been in the market. And you look across the ecosystem, speaking to participants who don't directly interact with things like the ETF and more traditional markets, people really don't expect it. I think people have been burned one too many times in the past with the Bitcoin ETF is coming headlines and narrative. And Monday's move to me showed that. And the fact that prices have stabilized at that higher level, I think, seeing that reaction, people want to make sure they're not missing out and starting to finally price it in. You look at the Grayscale Trust discount. Now those are narrowing to tightest levels in a year plus. And so people are starting to finally position for the move.
If the SEC does say no to these proposals, will we see any meaningful move lower? I mean, you mentioned that people are starting to have a bit of FOMO and they're trying to get in the hopes that it will get approved. What's the reaction on the other side if it doesn't get approved?
Yeah, definitely would have a negative impact. I think the ETF narrative is is one that's really driving the market today. Even if the ETF does get approved, it still could be a classic sell the news event if something like flows, don't correspond to the hype on the first day or first week. But I think broadly speaking, on the macro level, there's some really positive tailwinds brewing for Bitcoin. And particularly, I want to point to gold, which is gold is rallying despite elevated real rates. I think real rates have peaked. You look at the rise in nominal interest rates, and for that to continue, I think it has to come from rising inflation expectations. And with all the talk of the Treasury trying to issue more and more debt to fund themselves, I think there's a very positive case to be made for gold and Bitcoin as flight to safety assets. And Fink and Paul Tudor Jones are a couple of the people that mentioned that as well earlier in the week.
Yeah, that was actually the next topic I wanted to ask you about is the sort of macro environment right now. If I think back to the beginning of 2023, we were all worried about potential recession, rising interest rates, the inflation. It seems like we're starting to sort of get back to those same concerns as we close out 2023 with inflation, a possible recession ahead. Is Bitcoin back where we were at the beginning of 2023 in terms of sentiment among investors? Are concerns growing again that are either good for Bitcoin or bad for Bitcoin?
Definitely, the markets are thawed or a bit more constructive than we were end of last year, going into early this year. People were very offsides. The tax loss selling going into year end, both in tech equities and crypto, where people had losses. But I think it's sort of a different game today in the sense that 2022 and into early 2023 was just nothing but idiosyncratic negativity towards the Bitcoin crypto space. Headline after headline: bankruptcy, fraud, SEC clampdown. And I think what we're starting to see is a reversion in that trend. And the Bitcoin spot ETF is one, the ETH futures ETF was the first. And I think that will kind of carry all the way into the election next year, where there's a lot of momentum brewing underneath maybe the positions of direct power today that are becoming more constructive on the ecosystem. And so I think it's a broader tailwind that crypto is due a little bit for this mean reversion trade and catch up as there's more acceptance. We've worked out a lot of the bad actors, and there's some real value in the ecosystem.
Yeah, you've talked about tailwinds heading into 2024 just now. What about headwinds? It's kind of hard to believe that we're closing out 2023 already and we're getting ready for 2024. But what's the sort of big headwind for Bitcoin that you've noticed in 2023, and is it something that it can overcome as we head into next year?
Probably the biggest headwind is just the apathy towards the ecosystem at this point. We see this time and again in downdrafts in bear markets is, there's the big upswing, the big downswing, and then there's this period of 9, 12, 15 months where not a lot happens and people get bored, startups run out of funding, people go back to their traditional jobs. And but that's really when the green shoots and seeds are sowed for the next wave in the technology cycle. And so when I look to 2024, that the biggest headwind is just this continued apathy towards the sector, lack of inflows. Maybe there's some negative headlines around regulation here and there. But I kind of view it more on a macro scale. Something that, would tip in the balances against crypto would be if the Fed ultimately, interest rates keep rising, markets start to turn over, and the Fed kind of, unlike they've ever done in the past, said, this is out of our control. The fiscal situation needs to cool down. We're not going to step in here and back up liquidity until the Congress and the Treasury get their spending reined in, which I don't think is going to happen at all. I think, as we've seen, that reaction function to step in when the markets face turbulence has continued to shorten. And that's really, to me, what the gold and Bitcoin markets are sniffing out now.
Okay, that's all for Crypto World today. We'll be back again tomorrow, and we'll see you then.